Giving Habit, brought to you in partnership with the Majority Trust. Learn more about how they do philanthropy differently at majority.sg. When I sat down with Tom Steele from the Centre for Evidence and Implementation, I expected a conversation about research, data and evaluation, perhaps even about randomised control trials, and we certainly talked about all those things. But the more I've reflected on our conversation, the more I've realised it was actually about something much deeper: integrity. Integrity isn't just about doing the right thing, it's also about asking whether the thing you're doing is actually working. Now, that's not always a comfortable question, especially in the social impact sector. Most charities, social enterprises and community organisations begin with the very best of intentions. They see a problem, they care deeply about it, they want to help, and that's a wonderful place to start. But good intentions alone do not guarantee good outcomes. And I think that's something we sometimes struggle to talk about. When people dedicate their lives to a cause, it's natural to become emotionally attached to the solutions that have been built. People have invested time, energy, resources. They've poured their heart into making something happen. So what happens when the evidence suggests it isn't working as well as was hoped? Or perhaps it works in one community but not another? Or perhaps it works brilliantly as a pilot but loses effectiveness when you try to scale? Those are difficult questions, but they are essential conversations. One of the things Tom said that really stayed with me was the distinction between asking whether something works and understanding how it works. Knowing something works is useful. Understanding why it works is transformational. Once you understand the mechanism behind success, you can improve it, you can adapt it, and you can replicate it. And perhaps most importantly, you can avoid wasting precious time and resources pursuing solutions that aren't delivering the impact you hoped for. Now, that requires a particular kind of humility, the humility to admit that we don't have all the answers, to be curious, to learn, and to sometimes change our minds. I think that's where evidence becomes so important. Not because evidence is more important than people, but because people are so important. If you're working with vulnerable communities, if you're supporting young people struggling with mental health, if you're helping families experiencing poverty, or if you're trying to improve educational outcomes, then surely those people deserve more than our good intentions. They deserve our best thinking. They deserve our willingness to learn. They deserve our commitment to improving what we do. That's what evidence provides: accountability, progress, transparency. As someone who donates to different charities, these ideas matter to me a great deal and something I consider before I do so. That's why this episode felt so important to me, to know that there were organisations out there doing this important work. It builds integrity into the philanthropic space as a whole, helping to set standards of behaviour, evaluation and measurement. Now, sometimes when people hear terms like evaluation or implementation science or evidence-based practice, they might imagine bureaucracy, compliance. My discussion with Tom encouraged me to think about it differently. Evidence is actually an expression of care. Evaluation is an expression of respect, measuring outcomes not to prove we're right, but about ensuring we are genuinely helping, or to explore and better understand whether there are unintended consequences to the work we do. That feels like a healthier way to think about it. One of the challenges in the social impact sector is that the problems we're trying to solve are rarely simple. Mental health, homelessness, educational disadvantage, social mobility, loneliness. These aren't engineering problems with neat solutions. They're deeply human, complex challenges, what some people might call wicked problems. And because they're complex, we need both heart and head. We need compassion and we need rigour. We need empathy and we need evidence. We need people who care deeply enough to act and people who care deeply enough to ask difficult questions. Toward the end of our conversation, we talked about intentionality, the importance of pausing long enough to ask better questions. Who are we trying to help? What change are we trying to create? How will we know if we're making progress? What are we learning along the way? These sound like simple questions, but they're surprisingly powerful. And perhaps they're questions all of us can ask, not just social impact organisations. Maybe in our work, in our leadership, in our communities, in our own lives. Because growth often begins with curiosity, and improvement begins with honesty. So perhaps that's the invitation from this episode, to embrace both compassion and rigour, to care enough to act and to care enough to learn. Because integrity isn't simply doing good. Integrity is being willing to ask whether we're doing good well. And when we do that, we give ourselves the very best chance of creating meaningful and lasting change. Until next time, thanks for tuning in.